Well, it is my pleasure this evening to introduce Barry Thomas. I was introduced myself to Barry when we were together in the room with Alicia Brooks, who you guys may remember we had as a CFS speaker in January. And I was like, you've got to be kidding, we have this treasure in OPS and I didn't know this. And so I was just scheming as to how to get him here to Countryside. But as you heard the scripture for tonight, I was thinking of him as well as one who is in his homeland. You know that you were in elementary school, Wakanda, is that right? Is that where you went? Menalusa. Went to Menalusa, but then he went away for college, but he came back. And he came back because he wanted to serve the community, because he's so community oriented, and he came back with words of wisdom for us. And so I thought of you with that scripture as well. So it's not a coincidence I chose that scripture tonight. So Barry does serve as the curriculum supervisor for secondary social studies at OPS. He has not one, but 2 master's degrees. One is in education and the other is in
curriculum. One is in secondary education, the other is in curriculum instruction.
And he actually did some of his education here through Doane College and their program that they use Countryside for. So he's actually familiar with our facility. So in another way, he's a native come home. So I asked him tonight to, because part of it was very interesting, we have a study group that's reading the new Jim Crow, and one of the things that he had expressed so well when we were around the table with Alicia Brooks is, that book is 4 years old, and what's being done about it? He just really brought across the passion about how we can have all the statistics and all the things that we have to back this up, which if you look at her footnotes in that book, they're unassailable. Well, what is being done about it? So I just wanted to invite him here to tell a little bit of his perspective of the new Jim Crow and race relations. Thanks.
And I greatly appreciate the opportunity that Kelly has bestowed upon me to just be able to speak on something that I do have quite a passion about in regards to the society. I won't even be as specific to say the African American experience. I won't be specific to say those that are incarcerated, but just these things that happen to a few of us affect all of us. And it's a passion of mine to get people to understand just the impact of, the ripple that comes from each of these different types of instances in which people are being incarcerated at an alarming rate. And as stated before, we've talked about it, we've read about it, we've written about it, and so now what? But before I get into that, I think I just wanted to, as we came in scripture, it's Tracy, right? As Tracy brought the scripture to us, I actually, in knowing that I was going to be speaking to a group at a church, I found a scripture that kind of, I think, helps me to preface where my discussion is going to come from. And it's Ephesians 6:12, and it reads, For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, and against mighty powers in this dark world, and against evil spirits in the heavenly places. And as I read that, and that scripture became a revelation to me about 3 years ago, as I was battling through some things personally, and realized that there are things that have been put in place, systems that have been put in place that we operate within, not knowing that they're having an impact on us. It's sort of the environmental laws and policy that may be being passed are having an impact on the water that we drink, but we don't know every time we pour a glass that there's a rule that's been put in place that can say how much chlorine is in the water and how many minerals are in the water, and we still just partake in this not knowing. And there's a subconsciousness of this system that needs, I believe, to be brought to the conscious level. And as the scripture talks about it, we're not as we look at the news and we see the case in which the young lady just recently in Maryland it was being was being detained, I'll say that loosely, in her classroom by the school resource officer. Or, you know, we can run through from last week when that news broke to Trayvon back all the way to Medgar Evers and back to slavery and everything else. But there have been things, as you've read and as you're reading about it in New Jim Crow, systems that have been put in place to maintain a power structure and to hold individuals that have power with to be able to retain that, and those that without that power really have to scratch, claw, and dig, and even sometimes, and even in their best efforts, fall short of that. As Kelly and I sat around a table, and as the New Jim Crow talk came up, you know, I try to put a face to a lot of the different, there's data on court cases and all kinds of things in there. But I try to put a face to, I think, to make people connect to what can be a graph, or what can be a pie chart, or what can be a court case, or whatever it may be. And so when I was 11 years old, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska. And as stated, I started moving to, when we moved there, I went to Minnaloussi Elementary. I just went there for 6th grade, and I met my best friend. His name is Tawan English. And he and I hit it off. He was a comedian, and I thought I was funny. And and so we would try to break jokes and everything else in class, and both of us got into our share of trouble and everything while we were in school. Tawan had a different kind of a situation at home, to where his rules didn't necessarily, the rules that he broke in school didn't have as big as an impact on his behind when he got home as what mine did when I got home with my mother. So I knew what line to stay within, where I knew I could kind of fall short of where I would have to deal with my mom. But Tawan just kind of did whatever he wanted to do, and ended up the similarities between the two of us just ended up kind of going a different path than what I did. And it wasn't by, and I've had conversations with him, and it wasn't by any other, it was just serendipity. It was just just chance that he ended up taking a completely different route that I did. By sophomore year in high school, Tawan had dropped out. He was selling crack. He was stealing cars. He was doing a lot of things that he just didn't do the right thing. And he had, and it was always a shameful thing to me, because I saw him selling drugs, and I saw him stealing car radios, and I saw him doing a lot of those things, and I was too scared. Again, I knew what my mom was capable of, so I was too scared to partake in any of those types of things. But again, he just had a certain type of mentality to where he was just going to go get money. And that was the means in which he saw it, which was sad to me. And I said that twice, because he had an entrepreneurial spirit, that I just don't think that he found the appropriate vein to express it in. When we were in 6th grade and we were in 7th grade, many kids pray for snow days so that you don't have to go to school, you can sleep in. Tawan prayed for snow days because he saw an opportunity to go make money as much as possible. And he would wake me up on a snow day. I'd hear the news and say, it's 6:15, we don't have school today, and I'd roll back over and go to bed, and about 30 minutes later, Tawan's knocking at my door with 2 snow shovels saying, hey, there's money out here, let's go get it. Or during the summers when we were out of school, Tawan would be the one knocking at the door saying, hey, I got a lawnmower, you can do the front yard of this house, I'll do the backyard, we'll split the $20. That was his mentality. So whatever he could do to make money, he would do those things to make money. And one other thing that he did, I remember we would walk by this corner store on our way to school, and every morning he would buy a box of oatmeal pies. You guys know the white box of those oatmeal pies? I think it's Little Debbie. He'd get a box of those. It was $1 for a box, and there was 10 of them in there. And so he'd buy that box of Little Debbie's, and we had these coats that we used to wear. There was a big zipper in the front, and he just put all of the Little Debbie's in his pocket. And then what he would do is he would take them to school, and he'd sell them for $0.25 each. Okay? So he's making 15-cent profit off of every time he sells one of those Little Debbie's, and every day that was what he would use to re-up, and that would be his little change that he would get. When I say he had the mindset of an entrepreneur, he truly had the mindset of an entrepreneur. But again, I think he was given different opportunities to express that entrepreneurial spirit. And in this case, the system that he operated within limited his opportunities to where he saw his opportunity to be a venture capitalist in drugs, or a venture capitalist instilling car radios, and ended up getting caught. And I speak to him. He's in prison right now. I think he's got another 17 years for conspiracy to distribute narcotics. But I speak with him probably, it was for a while, it was probably like once or twice a month. He's kind of slowed down here recently. But I've talked to him and I've said, we had the same type of upbringing. Both of us lived a corner away from each other, lived in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools. His father and mother were drug addicts. My father was a drug addict. It just so happens, and I tell him this from time to time, I would be puzzled as to why I ended up 2 master's degrees, teaching certificate, doing what I'm doing, and why he ended up in the situation he's in. And it's not, I used to think it was because I had the right people in my life. I had a pastor that would pick me up and take me to to cut people's yards so I can make $10, $15 on weekends and things like that, where he didn't have that same person. I had a mother who, again, would find anything within reach to put me back into place when I stepped outside of place. Both of his parents were, again, addicted to drugs, so he didn't have that. There were some things that were different, but for the most part, we had the same type of situation, and it just ended up being 2 completely drastically different outcomes in what became of that. And when it comes down to it, when I looked at it, I found that it was luck that I ended up being where I am. And as I like to say to church folk, I was blessed. There were many times I can remember my freshman year at Wayne State College, I got a minor in possession ticket. And that could have kept me from getting a teaching certificate 3 years later. My freshman year, I was walking down Main Street. Hello, it's like Dodge Street in Wayne. So I'm walking down Main Street, and I had a 40 ounce of whatever beer it was, and just out in the open, like I was legally able to do that. And ended up just getting a ticket for $250, which made me work at Taco Bell that semester to pay that fine off, and then that was it. Applied for a teaching certificate 3 years later, and they didn't hold it against me. Otherwise, that could have been detrimental to my opportunities. Too many times in opportunities that I made mistakes and just did not get caught. And the difference between he and I is he did and I didn't. And that's really what it all boils down to. It's the systems were set up the same for both of us. The system was set up the same for both of us. It's just I was fortunate enough not to step on the landmines that he was unfortunate enough to find. And it can't be that slim of a difference between one kid on one street and another kid on another street to where just by happenstance you end up getting an opportunity. Because he's sitting in a jail wasting away an entrepreneurial spirit that, to be honest with you, could have spread throughout his family the way that my education is helping my family, as I have my nephew here with me this evening. The same education I have is the same talents and skills I possess that I get to put out for the community, that I get to put out for the world. He has those as well. And every one of those individuals incarcerated today in the prisons that you guys have been reading about in the new Jim Crow that have been locked up, all of these individuals within that system have something that they can lend to society. It's just that we are operating currently in our society to where the system is set up to trap or to slip or to provide more opportunities for those to not be successful in certain areas than there are for others. We talk about a need for heavy patrolling in certain neighborhoods and things like that, but what impact does that have? If you're only going out looking for trouble, you're only going to find trouble. But if you put different types of agencies and different types of institutions that are there to provide uplift for a neighborhood, uplift for a community, you may find that you are uplifting a community and helping those that are living within that community to contribute to society. There's so much, and I was telling Kelly this earlier this morning. We were talking, just getting prepared. There's so much systematically that is wrong with the society that we operate within. It's difficult for me to just slim it down to a couple things, but I'll just focus in on, and I'll speak on two specific systems that are currently, actually I'll allude to one and speak to the other, just for time's sake, because I do want to have time to discuss things with you. I'll focus in on two systems that have had and are still having a lingering impact on our society today. The one that I'll allude to is the one that you've read about. Okay, as you read through the new Jim Crow and you talk about and you look at the statistics and the data. The other one that's not in there is a precursor. It's, you know, they've made all these Star Wars movies now, and they're kind of making them to where they're showing you what happened before Darth Vader. And so I'm going to show you what happened before, or I'm going to talk to you about what happened before the new Jim Crow. That system that was set up actually before Jim Crow. Okay, and when I say this, I talk about the plantation system. Okay, and many people don't understand what all took place during slavery and during the institution of slavery and that plantation system that set up so much in course for where we are today as a society. And I'm going to speak specifically for African Americans. Okay, the first thing that happened on a plantation to set some type of system and set some type of order was they would take the strongest, and some of you may be familiar with the Willie Lynch letter. Okay, and if not, Google it. It will blow your mind. I'll say it that way. But the Willie Lynch letter speaks of it's a gentleman named Willie Lynch who's writing a letter to other slave controllers, other slave masters, about how to go about breaking a slave. Okay, and how to go about making a slave be one that would not rebel, one that would be compliant, so on and so forth. So he speaks in this letter, and he talks about numerous ways of just creating division amongst slaves on plantations. Because you have to think about the raw numbers of a successful plantation. You got hundreds of slaves, and there's only one master. So at any point in time, the fear of the slave master was rebellion. So the one thing that you had to do in order to make sure that rebellion couldn't take place is you had to have order and system in place to keep people at bay. And so what they would do is the first thing they would do is they would take the strongest stud slave, and Willie Lynch refers to the slave as a stud, as non-human, as an animal, as compared to a horse. He says, pull the stud out and pull all of the slaves out in the plantation. And I'll temper this because there's younger people in the room. But he says, pull the stud slave out and tie a rope to each of his limbs, and tie that rope, each of those ropes, to a different horse, and then simultaneously strike the horses, tearing each of the limbs off of the individual, so that all of the individuals on the plantation, all of the slaves on the plantation, can witness this. Now think about what this would do psychologically to an individual who witnesses this. Okay, you have to think of the trauma that takes place. So if you see something, the strongest and the biggest of all of us has now been tattered. If I'm a woman and I've been taught that a man is there to protect me, that's going to have an impact on how I think about men and how I think about protecting my child. Because in my village or in my society that I came from, men were the protectors. They were the ones who took care of us. And I'm seeing the biggest and strongest of us being torn apart. So that means to me, I need to check my reality to this new system in which I cannot trust the man that is said to be there, my husband, or the man that's there to provide or take care of me. Now, let's bring that to today. There's been a lot of discussion about the amount of children being born to unwed mothers in the African American community and the impact that that has. There's psychological connections from the plantation to today in that one piece of data, that one statistic, to where there has been a friction and complication in the relationships of men and African American men and women, to where today African American men, talk about unemployment as well, systems we're still talking about, have a difficult time. You know, I read, there was an article, I believe 2 years ago, that Omaha, they were one of the top 5 places to live in the United States, and they talked about unemployment. This is during, we're still recovering from '07, and they were talking about, top 5 places to live in the United States was Omaha, and they put an unemployment number up there. I want to say it was somewhere like 3 to 5%, somewhere in there. And I had seen more recent data of the African American community in Omaha, unemployment was at 26%. So the entire city of Omaha, 3%, 5% roughly, somewhere in there. But specific to African American community in Omaha, 25, 26%, which means you're having a difficult time taking care of your family, which means you can't provide within this system, and that draws some distinctions, or that draws some division between the man and the woman in the household, to where you may have a situation where you have it today, where women are less likely to marry a man because there may be trust issues, there may be a lack of provision for African American women because the men just can't find the types of opportunities to take care of themselves economically. That has roots. That has roots in plantation systems and plantation culture. If you take time to look at the difference between the young and the old, okay, one other thing, and I'll PG-13 the brutality of this whole thing. Another thing that the letter speaks of on how to make a slave on the plantation was, they said, take one of the old slaves on the plantation and one of the young slaves on the plantation and tie their hands behind their back, and then they would have to headbutt each other until somebody passed in front of the men, the older men and the younger men. So now you have more division. So now you have the older slaves and you have the younger slaves that don't work together. And you see today, before Bill Cosby went and got exposed about a lot of things that he's been up to or had been up to, Bill Cosby was a speaker, was an advocate about so many differences between African Americans that had gone through the movement, that had served during the Civil Rights era, and the young people of today. Those things, that's a common argument amongst all races about the difference between age and so on and so forth, these kids nowadays. But there's some root in that, because that type of division keeps an individual group from uniting. Typically, after individuals go through trauma, after individuals go through some type of a hardship, you'll see that they bind together more, okay? Think about the United States during the Great Depression. Okay, so many people going through hunger and homelessness. Our nation came together in those traumatic times. Think about those individuals who survived the Holocaust. Okay, so many of those 6 million Jewish people murdered during that Nazi reign in Germany. That community came together and solidified, and the nation was born from that unity. Okay, think about then why there are still so many divisions. Post-trauma of slavery, post-trauma of the original Jim Crow, post-trauma, I guess you could say technically, because I think the book kind of refers to some policies that took place in the 80s. So post-trauma, new Jim Crow, incarceration rates, or even during the trauma of this, why is there still then, if the natural human response is after a tsunami, communities come together. After an earthquake, communities come together. Look at Mexico and how they're coming together after this hurricane. Why then, after so many different traumas, do we still have this division within this one particular community? You have to think to yourself, what systems are individuals operating within? What's different about the world of this community that is so separate from those that have found a way to come together? And my whole purpose, you talked about coming back home, okay? My whole purpose, after I got my teaching certificate, after I got my bachelor's degree in education, my dream was to teach African American history at North High School. I was able to realize that dream about 4 years after I started teaching. And my purpose in that was not just to teach the black kids at North High School about African American history. It was to teach all individuals who walked into my door about African American history. I also, along the way, was able to teach U.S. history and economics, where we talk about economic systems, and trying to get people to understand not only what the world has out there, but what their place is in the world, and how big and how much of an impact they can have if finding the right way. But we have to always be mindful as I've tried to work with students to help them realize who they are, as I've tried to work with students to help them realize the world around them, they always have to be careful because those setbacks, those systemic things that are out there, they need to be aware of. And the New Jim Crow, the book that many of you have read, speaks to things that have happened throughout my life, my lifetime. I was born in 1980. It speaks about things that have policies that have taken place since the 1970s, since the 1980s, with incarceration, with drug sentencing. It speaks about those things that as I'm growing, I don't realize that. It's on a subconscious level. I just know that I've got cousins in jail. I've got friends in jail. I've got friends that have dropped out. I've got a lot of individuals who are falling victim to this system that has been put in place. And it took the work of Michelle Alexander to help me go from subconscious to conscious and understand the system that I was operating within. So now the question again was what to do with it. What to do with this information. The only thing we can do is have situations like this to where we have these discussions to make movements. I understand there's politicians in the room. I understand that there are researchers that look into information about communities in the room. And there's a vast wealth of talents and abilities in this room that in each of your own veins. Don't let your entrepreneurial spirit be trapped like my friend who now holds very little opportunity to do something when he gets out, when he's 50 years old. With that entrepreneurial spirit, we still have an opportunity outside, within this system and outside of this system, to make a change, to do something to make a difference, so that those individuals that are in this room and the legacies that you leave behind don't necessarily have to say that they just watched it happen. That they don't just have to say that I saw a girl getting flipped out of a desk on Facebook and all I did was comment about it. Do something. And if you're, and the one thing that I've said, and I jokingly was talking about how our, Omaha Public Schools, our human growth and development curriculum has been under fire here for the last couple of weeks, or actually for the last few months. And a colleague of mine was talking about, so many of those people, the 1,500 people that showed up at, I think it was last Wednesday, as a matter of fact, were so passionate about the topic. And, right or wrong, and whatever you may think or whatever you may feel, this colleague of mine was actually speaking, negatively about the individuals who came and were saying so much about Planned Parenthood and so on and so forth, not knowing what the information was. But I told her, I said, as a social studies person, I'm all about civic engagement. Right or wrong, speak to what you believe. Do something to make a change. Now, no matter what side of the aisle you sit on, left, right, or in anything in between, don't just sit. And that's what we have an opportunity as we learn about the new Jim Crow, as we learn about this system that we're operating within, as we learn about those that have fallen victim to or have put themselves in a position to be victimized by this system. Don't have a hard heart toward it. Don't have a hard heart toward it because that person made a mistake. Find out. Everybody has a story. Every one of these individuals, every one of these statistics that you've read about, every one of these pieces of data that you've seen about this number of this many people have been incarcerated, those are still individuals. Every time they put that unemployment rate up there, think about those are actual people who want jobs. Every time that they throw a statistic about college dropouts, high school dropouts, students who are on free and reduced lunch and everything else like that may be going hungry, think about not the number. That's what we get caught up so much into sometimes. Don't think just about the number, think about the individual. See, because I think about Tawan. Every time I see or hear something about incarceration, I think about my mom when I hear about single black women raising children, as my father was addicted to drugs, left at an early age from me. I think about personal individuals that connect to me. I think about my cousins who are in trouble nonstop with the law. As I walked into Walmart 3 days ago, I saw my nephew being pulled out in handcuffs. I think about I could put a face to a lot of these different statistics that come up, and I think that's a big difference for some people. You have to be able to make connections in order to make a change, or in order to be willing to make a change. And you know about the system now, or you're learning about the system now, or you're trying to figure out pieces of the system, and your eyes are being open to it. But as you learn about that broad outside entity, don't lose track of the individuals who are living within it. Because today you could do something to make a big difference for each and every one of those individuals inside of that system. So as I speak to you and as we talk and discuss about this new Jim Crow, just think about what impact the system is having or what impact you can then have on the system. Thank you very much for your time.
Questions?
Grab my water real quick.
Don't be shy.
I'm just curious, is the new Jim Crow required reading in the social studies classes that you're in charge of in all OPS schools?
It's a little bit higher than high school level reading.
I think it should be in middle schools.
There are, now I will say this, no, it is not required reading. We actually, we don't have specific text that are required reading within social studies classrooms. There are encouraged books within our language arts department, but we do not have a specific set of books that we say are required reading throughout social studies. I try to encourage teachers. One of my jobs as social studies supervisor is to provide resources to individuals. One of the teachers to be able to train them and develop them professionally, so that way they can go in the classroom and be most equipped in dealing with that. One of the things that as we talk about systems and we talk about multiple perspectives, one of the things that we have a stronghold on in our department and within social studies in secondary level is we try to get kids to understand and express understand data, and also to be able to express multiple perspectives and understand different sides to the story. So though Jim Crow itself, the new Jim Crow itself is not a required reading, the philosophy within, where you're doing research, you're looking at data, you're trying to find out what the story is, the perseverance of actually trying to develop an understanding, and then also understanding things from more than one perspective. Because as I stand here, I'm giving you my story, but there's somebody who's been a victim of somebody stealing their car radio. That is going to say, well, wait a minute, you're talking about your friend who went to jail for stealing car radios and selling drugs. Well, he was selling drugs to my aunt. He was selling drugs, so there's always different sides to the story. What we try to do is try to get people to get our students to understand it's not just a one-sided thing. Our textbook says one thing, but there may be other sources that speak against what the textbook says. We don't want our kids to just trust in one thing. We want them to explore other options. It's a really long answer to, do we have that book in our curriculum? So no, but the essence of it, I think, is what we do try to practice with our instruction in our classrooms. It just, honestly, it would be really difficult with that, that's a professor at Ohio State University writing that book for individuals like ourselves and for individuals in our classroom on a collegiate level to read. I got some babies who can do that, but I also got some individuals that we would need to, spend a little bit more time trying to get them to understand what those numbers and what that articulation stands for, what's being articulated in the book, I should say it that way.
So what book is there that teaches, especially the Black and other minority people of color,
Mm-hmm.
why they're seeing their aunts and uncles and moms and dads being sent to prison in a disproportionate number from all the white kids' parents and aunts and uncles? What book teaches them that in OPS?
It wouldn't be one source. It would be current events. It would be discussions about, when this story when Maryland breaks up. It's not being scared to talk to the kids about, how police brutality. It's not being scared to talk to them about the different issues within the community. It's not going to be one book. It's going to be, it's going to be a teacher who, they may feel courageous, is supported by administration, supported by those in the district, to force these kind of difficult conversations to take place within the classroom. So it wouldn't be one source. I guess the one source will be the teacher who's taking that information and putting it in front of the kids. Yeah, it wouldn't be just that one book though. Yes, sir.
How would you characterize Black Lives? You'd certainly have to say it's a positive force.
Yeah, I think, there's these fractions that take place, and there's these fractions of Black Lives Matter that if depending upon what channel you watch are going to speak negatively about it. The reality of this situation is, yes, true, all lives matter. You'll hear a lot of people talk about Black lives don't just matter, all lives matter. But again, all lives don't have that historical, systemic situation that has put them or is trying to maintain this power structure in which they are the powerless. So we have to be able to focus in on some specific deals that need to, I think, when the president talked about changing the policy on penalties for cocaine versus crack, that's a simple thing, a policy change that can make a difference, that can make a change. I'm an advocate for anyone who is engaged in civics. Okay, and again, right, wrong, or anything indifferent, I just believe that everybody should have some vested interest in what's going on in society around them, whether that be politics, whether that be economics, whatever it may be. Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, any of these entities that are speaking out about, the NRA, anybody who has a vested interest in society and is speaking to have those concerns being met, I'm an advocate for those individuals. I might not always agree with them, but I believe that that nothing comes about when we sit still. Everybody has to have a seat at the table in order for change to take place. So Black Lives Matter is just one of those other vessels that I believe is, a voice that needs to be heard. Yeah. And to be honest with you, I was actually thinking about this about 2 weeks ago. That movement really just has sprung up and taken on, it's on fire in a lot of different places. And I was thinking, I don't know where that would be connected to Omaha. I haven't found those entities that are being the leadership that has brought that to the city. I know we have the Empowerment Network that works a lot with the grassroots organization about, North Omaha and changing things in the African American community there, but it's not necessarily connected to Black Lives Matter as a political or as a social movement. That's more of an economic focus and a raising of the community type of thing. With having that lack of interaction with that movement, I just don't have, outside of what I've read or what I see, I don't have that direct personal connection to it to be able to understand truly what all they're standing for and what all they're fighting for. But I believe that some of the issues that are brought in this book in the New Jim Crow, as well as the work of Ta-Nehisi Coates, I don't know if you guys have gotten around to looking at any of those, but that's the next one. A lot of those issues that are spoken of in his work as well, Between the World and Me, which is ridiculously good. You're going to love that one. But yeah, the issues that are brought up in those types of books and in articles and things like that, those things need to be brought to the table. Yeah.
So we have an awareness. This book brings us an awareness that maybe we didn't see things that maybe we didn't see before, and we want to do something. We want to help. We want to change it. But we were talking in our discussion group about unintended consequences of things that we've done, and I think seeing that little girl thrown across the room was an unintended consequence of having officers in the school to protect the school from mass shootings. So I just don't, do you have an idea other than getting the information out there? And I have to say, unfortunately, I think I know people who think that's okay. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
The Willie, what's his face?
No, Willie Lynch or?
Yeah, the Willie Lynches of today.
Yeah, as far as everything that I do is all focused on education. And that's educating kids in schools, educating the parents at home. If you know there's a pothole coming up, you avoid it because you know that it's there. And I think if more people knew about these things that are in place, it's so interesting to me that there's such a vast amount of things that people just aren't aware of that impact them. But I say all that to say it's got to be educating people in order to make a change. It's got to be, and not just make a change, but I think I can't remember which politician said, policy. You can't change people's hearts, but you can change policy. And if individuals understand the route to take to speak to representatives, to speak to Congress, to speak to those individuals, city council, board members, things of that nature, if people know the right tact to take, they can make those changes without necessarily having to change the hearts of individuals, but changing just the way that society has to receive people. I had a group of kids at Mars Mars Magnet Center, that their siblings go to a school that's not but a few blocks away, and they would have to walk from the middle school to the elementary to pick their siblings up. And there was this sidewalk that was just really beat up, and the kids would have to walk in the street to avoid the mud and whatever else was going on with that sidewalk. And they reported this to the teacher. They were just in conversation and talked about it with the teacher. The teacher had those kids write letters to city council, had those kids get engaged civically, and as a result, the city repaved that sidewalk to keep kids from walking. I mean, it's just those, giving people the opportunity to see, yeah, you can make those differences, but it's going to take, knowing the right avenues and the right veins to make those changes. And if it's the curriculum of a district, one of the things we've done most recently is we've revamped our social studies curriculum. We've looked at, getting rid of the curriculum that gets you ready for Jeopardy. Who was the president in 1802? We don't necessarily we want our kids to understand who the four founders of our nation were, who the large events, the veterans that served in our nation. But we also want them to understand, again, how to look and do research on their own to find this information out, because there's stuff that we cover in our curriculum, but we leave a lot of stuff out, like the information you're reading about in the new Jim Crow. So how can we get kids to have an interest to go find that information? And I think that education is going to be the way that we get individuals to make a difference, to make a change. And it's a slow process. Sometimes it's painful, but I think for me that's the only way I can do it.
I have one change I'd like to see in language, and you talked about plantations, and some of us have these wonderful ideas of what a plantation is, but if we could call those work farms, which is actually what they were, maybe plantation work farms, it's a whole other idea that comes into our mind.
If we call them work farms.
A plantation is essentially a work farm,
Okay.
right?
Slave work farm.
Slave work.
Well,
and masters are not masters, they're enslaved.
Maybe if we throw forced work, or some way to where it's not, when I go to work, it's because I want to drive to my job.
Work
And
farm indicates, I think, like a prison farm. So maybe language changes is what I'm saying.
I understand what I get that, and there's tons of terms out there that we can play around with that might spark a certain type of
Because it's not Gone with the Wind we're talking about
well, parts of it.
here. Yeah, but gone, well, yeah.
I mean, it's
Plantation.
interesting. One of the notes that I had that I didn't get to was talking about how media portrays talking about Gone with the Wind. The first African American to win an Oscar award was, I think it was a Mammy. Is that what her name was in that?
Yes.
In that film, and you give Oscars to people who play a certain role, so that entertains and sets a certain precedence of what is expected. I'm sorry, I could go again. There's so much that I could really get into, but the vocabulary that we use, I like to use vocabulary that actually incites interest, that incites some type of connection emotionally, because I think it connects to people a little bit better. Plantation may have a different meaning for you than it does for me. Work farm may have a different meaning for you than it does for me. But as long as I'm saying something that makes something stick inside of you, that or rises some type of passion inside of you, that's all I'm interested in. So, work farm and anything else in between, as long as we understand what the root of that was, those systems were.
I think it's great that you wanted to teach Black history in a predominantly black school in North Omaha.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, I think there's between 3,000 and 4,000 teachers in OPS,
Mm-hmm.
and a small fraction of that is in social studies. What fraction of those are people of color? I've heard as few as 150 people out of 3,000 or 4,000 are people of color teaching students. And I'm just wondering, if you don't know the big number, how many social studies teachers?
I have 211 social studies teachers in Omaha Public Schools, and I would say that no more than, if I'm thinking I'm trying to go to all of my schools and think of all of my teachers at all of them, I'd say of color or African American.
Well, if you know both, I'm most interested in people of color.
I would say of color, I'd say maybe 10%, 20 of them. I don't have that exact, but I'm thinking, as I'm thinking about the buildings that I go to and the teachers that I supervise, I think about 20 of the 211 are of color.
And do you think that number should be the same as our population of the city? Should closer to 1/3 of them?
I think that we should have people that want to teach kids. And having an ideal situation would be representative of the demographics that you teach. But if it's a white person teaching black kids and they care about them, that's the only thing that matters as far as I'm concerned. Would I like to see more African Americans, more Hispanic Americans, more Asian Americans, more whatever Americans teaching in classrooms? Absolutely, I'd love to see that. But I'm more interested in the individuals in the classroom as opposed to the race of the individual that's in the classroom. Just me specifically. I know you can have an impact by being a good role model, and that's one of the things that I thought and focused on for myself. When I went back to trying to teach when I taught at McMillan and when I taught at North, I always thought to myself, hey, you gotta be a representative, you gotta be a model, because a kid I had kids in East Omaha that were living in trailer parks that, had a certain idea of what African American was, and I had to counter some of the negative images that they may have had, just the same as I did, African American kids living in the projects that were in my classroom that may have had the same type of mentality about what African American was. I had to dispel those stereotypes and rumors as well. So I always walked in thinking about myself as a role model. But again, a white male, a white female, an Asian female walking into a classroom, as long as they have the heart for those babies in that room, that's the only thing that I care about, because I truly believe that if you have a heart for your kids, you'll do whatever it takes to make sure that they're successful. For me personally, it's just not about necessarily the race of the teacher, but it's the heart of the teacher.
I guess I see the role.
I know that's like really cuddly, but
Yeah,
that's my reality.
I guess I think it's very important for people of color, students of color, to see people like them teaching, so they say, oh, I could do that job, instead of, oh, that's a white person's job, which is what our OPS school is teaching people of color right now, is that you don't belong in the teacher's ranks.
Are hospitals doing the same thing?
I think the same
our
problem.
airport security. Students should see people looking like them working all kinds of jobs.
That's true.
Not necessarily just a teaching job. So it's not, college professors, politicians should look like the kids and, things like that. I mean, it shouldn't just be one specific as bankers should, look the same as the kids or the customers that they're serving. So to just kind of look at just the teacher, that's one job, absolutely. And there's representative floating around of, principals that are minorities and women and teachers that are minorities. There's a fair representation in all of our schools. Is it the best situation? Probably not, as far as if you're looking to try to get a ratio to be exact to what the demographic of the student is. But we'll get to that cornucopia at some point. But right now, I'm more concerned about just the person who's teaching these kids, whether they know what the heck they're talking about and care enough about those kids. Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Because I know that I need to spring him so he can go
Yeah, that little
be
guy
a
back there is
role
waiting to get
model
to
for his church as
Start
well.
doing some trick or
So-
treating stuff over there for this guy
Tell
back there.
those people about, this is just, it has nothing to do with
Oh.
race or racism, but tell them about your no trick, we treat.
So this evening, my church, I go to Eagles Nest Worship Center. This evening, my church is preparing we do an activity called No Trick, We Treat. So on the Wednesday, or whenever the Wednesday leading up to Halloween takes place, our kids get to wear their outfits early. Okay, and our pastor says we pay for the uniforms, we want to be able to wear them more than once. So our kids get to wear their outfits, and then we set up an assembly line, and they kind of just get a bag, and we throw Snickers and Skittles and stuff like that into a bag, but we also leave a little ministry note, a little mission note inside of each of these bags, and families take these bags home with them. And then on Halloween, instead of going from door to door and our kids getting candy, our kids go door to door, and actually we say no trick, we treat. And we go and give bags to the families that are out there selling candy, giving out the candy during Halloween. And each of the different bags has some good candy in it, but also a good message in it from our pastor too. So that's what we do for No Trick, We Treat.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah. So that's what he's got to go help me out with. My nephew back in here, unfortunate gentleman, had to listen to his uncle run his mouth for 30 minutes or whatever, keeping him in between the candy that's waiting for him at the church. But yeah, so that's what we have to go take care of. So
Well, help me thank him for spending.
thank you.